oftentimes startups have a little bit of a transition just mentally handing those tasks off to other people. And to the extent that you don't do that, you are going to find yourself pulled in 10 different directions and away from the direction you should be focused on, which is growth of the business.
Welcome to the Legacy in the Making show. I'm your host, LA's foremost success coach, Maree Torrey. I interview leaders and influencers who've gone beyond the superficial markers of success and claimed true fulfillment by leveraging their positions to create positive and profitable changes in their businesses and beyond. They share their stories and offer real-world, boots-on-the-ground experience that translates into practical advice to apply to your own journey. I invite you to this injection of wisdom and inspiration so you can prevail and leave your own lasting legacy. Legacy makers, it's Maree Torrey here with the Legacy in the Making show. And today I'm so excited to introduce you to Tricia Salinero. And Tricia is the managing director of Woodside Capital Partners, a world-class strategic and financial advice firm for the emerging growth companies in the technology sector. And in her 20 years as a mergers and acquisitions expert, Tricia has completed more than 100 technology mergers and acquisitions valued at $4 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars. She's represented companies that sold to people like Google, Microsoft, Red Hat, Oracle, American Greetings, and Autodesk, just to name a few. So I've invited her here today so she can share some sage advice with us on how we can prepare our company for acquisition and potentially access funds that will help us grow. So anyone, especially in the technology sector, if it's not you, if you know someone that's in the technology sector, this is going to be such a powerful episode for helping you prepare and plan powerfully for an exit strategy and also for how you can just set your business up for success in general. So if it's not you, please spread the word. I'm sure you know someone that is a founder that's trying to grow their business. Tricia also is on a mission to ensure that underrepresented founders have access to economic opportunities that are normally reserved for that old boys club we all know exists. So there's a lot of capital out there that you can use to grow startups, and we're going to talk about how you can get ready to access them. So Tricia, I'm so thrilled to have you here. Would love to hear a bit of your backstory. How did you get into the mergers and acquisitions world?
Thank you, Maree. I really appreciate you having me here today. It's a little bit of luck, serendipity, and of course hard work that got me into M&A. I had been working through my graduate degree at night, and I needed a technology job during the day to sort of pay my bills. Ended up working for a company first as a temp, of all things, and then moving into a full-time position in corporate development. And learned, some of the early ropes on how do you do licensing deals, how do you work with product managers, how do you work with technologists. And it was an exciting time in the business because the business had just gone public and they were really trying to kind of grow that business in a thoughtful way. As part of their journey, the company's journey, a company called Supermac, they were actually approached by a buyer, and that buyer was a competitor. And as part of that, they said, okay, we're going to combine these two companies together, and we're really just interested in the engineers. So Tricia, you can either stay or take the package. And I said, you're just interested in the engineers. Okay, I think I'll take the package. And part of that
handshake, right? An early golden handshake. That's kind of cool. Starting out from being a temp.
Yes, exactly. So I looked around and realized that investment bankers, M&A advisors had been in our doors. And I really wanted to know what they did. And so I reached out to a couple of firms and said, I'm really good at history. I have an undergraduate degree in history of all things, which doesn't usually translate well to investment banking. And I have a master's degree in public administration, running cities. And that's not also perfectly placed for investment bankers, but I was good at research. And that was part of what I think had, been the early attraction to technology, is that, there are all these areas of research.
I love that because my original way back in the day degree is in graphic design. So
that's great.
And then I ended up working for technology companies. I was actually part of a startup that was acquired by a Fortune 500 company. I owned global product and I actually owned the company's only proprietary piece of software. This is way back in the day, right? Just because we've got a degree in one thing, life paths take us in different ways. And I think it's a lot to do with we do develop skills. Like you developed that research skill, right? Like no experience ever goes to waste is really what it comes down to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And part of my graduate degree was in organizational development. So I got that opportunity to then use some of those skills along the way as well, right? So back to your idea, no skill, goes unused, right?
Exactly. And every once in a while, the graphic design thing comes in.
That's perfect. And so I, ended up calling a middle market firm called Broadview, and I said, I'm not sure what you guys do there, but here are my skills, and I really would love to talk to you through how that might be relevant. And ended up working for what turned out to be one of the largest independent tech bankers, in the 90s. Grew up there from an analyst to an associate, VP, principal, and then the tech downturn.
I was just going to say, it must have been an exciting time because you went through the whole dot-com bubble, right?
Yes. Yes. I learned a lot of great skills in up markets, and then not so much. There's, in the down market, right? What do you do? And so in 2001, when the market kind of fell apart, I ended up looking around. I was part of the 6th round of layoffs. At the time, there were no small banks and small deals getting done. And I really thought that if there was a road to recovery, that those deals were the ones that were going to get accomplished over the next couple of years. They wouldn't be, these massive $1 billion deals. There would be $10 million deals and $20 million deals. And so I put together my own firm called New Fourth Partners and ran that for the next 10 years. Yeah, it was a scary time because I, didn't know what I was doing. And I think that's part of the journey too, right? Is questioning, how you're getting these things together.
Yeah. So you really do have full on what I call boots on the ground experience of what it's like to start and create a powerful startup. And you were very successful with that, right? And it sounds like to some extent you flew by the seat of your pants.
Yes, as we all do.
What do you think helped you in terms of, because I'm very interested in helping my clients access what I call their innate wisdom. And that's when we make decisions based on our true deepest knowing, rather than oftentimes we rely a lot on the head-based stuff, the logic, and make decisions from fear and scarcity and things like that. What do you think it was that served you to be able to navigate these really very choppy waters and be successful?
I think it is having that sense of, I've listened to all of these other voices. I've listened to advisors. I've listened to family. Every single part of the way, you have these people who will chip in their voice. And really, there has to be something, to your point about the innate resources. What inside of you resonates with that message? now that I've seen these three alternatives, and I'm a list maker, so sometimes I would do my pluses and my minuses. And sometimes, those pluses and minuses really come down to what's my gut feeling, right? What really, I don't have a basis in fact, I have a list, but what does my gut feeling tell me, right? And I've learned through not trusting that gut feeling that I need to trust it, right?
Right. Give us an example of when you didn't trust. Can you conjure up a memory of something that happened when you didn't trust what you knew and what the fallout of that was?
So I had a theory that pre-transaction positioning was going to be a path as part of being an M&A advisor. So this idea that you could, 6, 12, 18 months in advance of a transaction, start setting yourself up for ways to be more successful. And as part of that process in my Newforth days, I hired consultants to help guide my clients through some of that process.
It's a sound theory.
It's a sound theory. But what happened is I made incorrect choices in the types of consultants. What I really should have done was, partnered with someone like you and had my CEOs, talk to someone who could bring forth their own success instead of the types of consultants that I did work with, which came from large, very expensive firms who had ideas about companies that weren't appropriate for startups. And so that mismatch, I was following a playbook, but that playbook didn't resonate with my own feelings about how do you, actually talk companies through these times.
I love that. And that is, of course, so in alignment with my experience. I work with people from all sorts of industry, from real estate to financial advising to tech startups and in between. And what I see, I get to see the results of what happens when you actually do the kind of work that I do and get to the point where you really have very well honed instincts. You're super clear on what your company's mission is, what your values are, all those things. You have all those really important building blocks in place. It is oftentimes less about the theory. And people say to me, it's really interesting to me. You don't have to be an expert in real estate. You don't have to be an expert in financial advising in order to help me grow my company. And it's because really it's those, what we call soft skills that actually so often can make the difference. I love that example. That's really interesting that you've had very similar experience in your career.
And those soft skills make a huge difference at that pre-transaction stage, because part of that mission, 12 months, 18 months in advance, is telling your story in a way that can be known, right? So being vocal about it, going out there, and even if it's a press release on your own website, and there's no other distribution, how are you telling your story in a way that is both authentic, is available and indexable and understandable for buyers to come and see what is your company all about?
Yeah, absolutely. That's all there's such important building blocks. And I do think oftentimes what happens when you are forming a startup, and this, and I know this, having been part of the startup world, is that it is very easy to be pulled in a zillion different directions. And getting that honed in focus and making sure that you are developing the important building blocks of that business. It can be really hard when you're oftentimes initially, as the leader, also chief cook and bottle washer.
Exactly. And I find oftentimes startups have a little bit of a transition just mentally handing those tasks off to other people. And to the extent that you don't do that, you are going to find yourself pulled in 10 different directions and away from the direction you should be focused on, which is growth of the business.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely. In fact, just recently I I was working with a CEO who was still doing payroll. She came back to me a week later because we did the work on it. You know what I mean? It's like we dissected the thoughts and the beliefs that she had that were keeping her feeling like she needed to be the one to do that, right? So once we deconstructed all of that and came up with a new way of looking at things, a few days later, she actually hired someone to do that. And she came back to me and she said, wow, like I'm really starting to realize that there's really a process for creating a leader. And there's definitely a process for creating a great leader.
Yes.
You've obviously
over and over again, right?
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, you've obviously had the opportunity to meet and know a lot of great leaders as you've gone down this path, because you actually really get to meet people when they've reached that point, that acquisition ready point, right? What are some of the characteristics that you recognize in those leaders that the legacy makers in this audience might want to build up as their personal arsenal?
I think, some of the most important and successful talents that I see again and again are that talent to tell your own story very authentically and crisply. So it's not just authentic, but it's also in a way that is digestible for people. And I think that often sort of founder owners, founder operators have that a little bit more coaching that needs to be done, but along the way to tell that story crisply in a way that's digestible for certain audiences.
Yeah.
So you may have a very different story that you tell your customers versus the people whom you might find as investors. And I think telling that story in a sort of monotone and a one card, one vision is not necessarily the best. It doesn't serve the company in the best way.
Right. Exactly. I totally agree with you there. People learn from stories, and it is one of the things that I work with people on. I'm actually pretty gifted as I have clients that are like, I'm super stuck on this. And I actually, because of the neurofeedback technology and stuff that I use, Tricia, with myself and my clients when they're here in person, which of course isn't happening right now because I'm a bit of a geek. I come from the tech world, right? So it's like I employ anything that's going to make people more effective. So my typing speed is really laser fast. It can type at the speed that people are talking. And so all they have to do is sit there and kind of blurt it out, and I'll be like typing it and rephrasing it and making sure I'm capturing their words as well at the same time. And that's one of the funnest sessions I do with my clients is working on the story component.
Exactly. And telling that story in a crisp way is very vital if you're going to go out for outside capital and get investors to get behind you. And there are all sorts of different types of capital that might be available. There are angel investors, there are banks, certainly. There are venture capitalists. And then as the company becomes much more profitable, there are companies that segmented as private equity suppliers. And what I'll tell you about all of that is there's a ton of money out there. And so to the extent that you're telling your story in an authentic way and working your networking skills, you can tell that story again and again and again. And it's going to take that because honestly, every day that you're looking for money is an enterprise sales day. You are an enterprise salesperson as a founder, right? Yep. And so having a pipeline of 100 targets, and all of those targets tend to be venture, angel, whoever they are, but you're going out to them and you're telling that story again and again, and you're refining it along the way based on the feedback that you have. And looking at every no as an opportunity to better refine that story. And that's one of the things that I think you can do well in advance of a transaction point, a financing point that will help the company.
Tell us a bit more about what you can do in advance. I remember the last time we were talking, you shared with me that you had a friend that reached out to you and said, okay, this is what I want to do. And you took a look at his business and went, my friend, you're not ready, but these are the things you need to do. And you gave him like a pretty specific shopping list.
Yes.
right?
Yes.
You needed to do to get acquisition ready. And the fact of the matter is that I know we're talking about acquisitions today, but these principles still work whether you want your company to be acquired or not, right? Because really what you were doing was you were teaching them how to set up for success.
Exactly.
So what was the shopping list? Come on, we want to know the insider secret here.
Well, so, a couple of the things along the way, I have a top 10 tenets that I will share with companies, oftentimes. And it's going through and making sure that you have clean financials, that you have worked with professionals along the way who have some expertise in giving you an employment agreement or an invention and assignment agreement. And I know the tendency, because I've done it myself as a startup person, is to find the easiest, cheapest, available for free on the internet version of these things. But you do need to remember that there's a time and a place for that. So the things that worked for you at your incorporation and the attorney that you found around the corner from the local gas station is probably not the same person that you're going to want when you're delivering 5 million in sales or 10 million in sales. And that letting the maturity of your advisors mirror the maturity of your company is a very important sort of tenet beyond all of this. You want an attorney that has experience in financings or experience in large OEM deals or whatever that contractual time frame might be. So that's sort of one area is get your back office in order, hire a payroll specialist, and make sure that it's following that maturity and that you're not always looking for sort of the cheapest opportunity. I think the next thing, again, harkening back to be available to be known. Talk to industry magazines, talk on Twitter to yourself, even. Put things on your website. But these days, especially these days, people are doing research from their desk. Mm-hmm. And so they're trying to find you, and you need to be available to be found. That's probably the next biggest area that we find, people have some level of, I won't call it immaturity, but it comes behind their maturity of the company. It doesn't all mature at the same time. And so
it sounds like really you've got to get your social media strategies, your marketing campaigns, and get your story, your company's story, and your story as the founder as well, because invariably, like, people buy from people that they like. You've got to be what Russell Brunson calls the likable personality. So having those pieces of the equation out there consistently, publicly, making sure that you've got an execution plan and strategy in place, and then the resources to deploy it. That sounds like, so that's your number 2. So number 1 is get your back office in order. Number 2 is get your marketing, your visibility, and your promotion components in order. Okay.
And then I think the next biggest area is really about understanding your landscape. And so understanding both who are your competitors and who are potential partners going forward, and having those conversations along the way. I will tell you, over the 100 deals that I've done, 75% of the time, the buyer knew of the seller. So there had been some awareness created, whether they worked together on a transaction, maybe the seller stole a deal from the buyer. They are integrated in software or hardware within the company, in the customer. All of those things are a great premise for an acquisition or even a strategic financing. So sometimes these large companies will make investments in smaller companies to see them grow into a good partner. And so looking for those touch points and those ecosystem builders can be very important along the way.
I love that. Ecosystem builders. Look for the ecosystem builders and build relationships with them. Really, essentially what I'm hearing you describe is relationship. And I'm assuming when you say like stole a deal, it was not necessarily doing something down and dirty, but more like, we had we had a competitive thing going on with a prospect, and that company won that deal.
Fair and square.
Fair and square. Yeah,
absolutely. Fair and square. It had a better product, right? And so to the extent that small company has a better product, one of the things that large companies look at is, how do I do outsourced R&D, research and development?
Mm-hmm.
How do I build things that are small, nimble teams that can extend my product, can extend my market? And those things often happen in startups. And so if you think of mergers and acquisitions really as outsourced research and development, you want to be that extensible team to that large company.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened in my history. That was exactly why we had the acquisition of our startup, and the product that I was responsible for was the reason why we were acquired.
Yes. Yes. And I'll tell you, there is a long tail of acquirers. So that's sort of the other thing is, oftentimes companies come to me and they say, well, I know Google is a perfect acquisition partner for me. And I'll say, okay, that's great. But let's talk about who's beyond Google, right? Because if you look at the last 5 years of acquisitions, there were about 7,000 acquisitions in technology over that period of time. And regardless of what number you buy into, some numbers are a lot higher than that in terms of acquisitions in technology. Only about 6% of those were done by the top 20 companies. And so you look at Google and Amazon and Apple and GE and all of these companies that do serial acquisitions, it's still a very, very small number of the overall acquisitions in tech. Which means that the bulk of deals are really done by one company will say, I'm going to do one acquisition this year. I'm going to do one acquisition in 3 years. That 1Z, 2Z acquisition strategy. And so I tell companies, look for that long tail. Look for companies that are in your segment who are maybe 10 times bigger than you instead of 1,000 times bigger than you. And those might be really good partnership.
That's awesome. This is such amazing information. So if I have collected all the brilliant gems that you've given us so far, it comes down to where we're getting the story right, the story of the founder and the story of the company and the mission and all those important components, mission values, all those important components in place in a succinct way so they can be communicated and adapted depending on your audience. And then we're getting our back office in order. And perhaps looking at where the back office was when we first started and where it needs to be when we're acquisition ready.
Yes.
And then we need to work on our outreach, our marketing, our visibility, all those pieces, and make sure that those are well in place so people know. I mean, and it's not like that isn't obvious. Like everyone knows they need to market their company, right? But we're talking about this marketing from a slightly different perspective. This is marketing towards the acquisition opportunity. The next thing was making sure that we don't just assume that we need to go for a big fish like Google, that there is a much bigger pool of people that whether they want to acquire your business or whether they want to invest in your business, there's a much bigger pool, and that there were 7,000 transactions at a minimum, depending on whose numbers you account for, that happened, and only 6% of those were with the big ticket companies. So this is a way to like expand your mindset and your awareness and bring in opportunity for yourself. That's amazing. What else do we need to know?
Well, I think one of the things that comes up often in my conversations with founders is, well, what do I do if I am approached? You know, what are the types of approach strategies? What counts as an approach? And what should I do with those things? And so I've found that founders will often get these inbound calls, and they'll get a voicemail or an email that they didn't expect. And that might be from someone in corporate development at a company. It might be from an analyst or an associate at a private equity firm. It might be from, someone who just says, hey, let's take this relationship to the next level, in terms of someone that you may be already working with.
Mm-hmm.
And what I found as part of that is to think through both who is making that approach and where they sit in the organization. And is that someone who can make a decision for you? Think about the target and what that looks like. Is that person capable of writing a check? Probably not. Mm-hmm. Really what they're doing is doing that groundwork. How do I know more about you? How do I know how big you are? What have I been able to glean about you out there in the world? And so I think it's important to understand the origination of that, to understand whether or not you want to develop that relationship, and to know that not all inbounds require action. That's yet another piece of this story. Because once you've been approached in this way and you've delivered a certain amount of information, it's time to have a conversation with someone who can write a check, who has profit and loss, P&L responsibility for bringing you into the company. And getting that champion within a buyer is very important.
What would you say is the best approach for someone to build a relationship with that champion?
I think that it comes really, the best approach of all things is that you share a customer. If there is a way to talk about, we share this customer, that drives so many more conversations down the line. And I think can be really vital to say, okay, one of my top 10 customers also uses your product. And I wanted to talk to you about maybe ways that we could further either market together or tell the same story or integrate in some better way to make it easier for our customer. That is the most compelling story that you can tell.
I love that. And that is such powerful language right there. So I hope that you guys are taking notes on this, because wow, the gems that Tricia is sharing with us are amazing. And Tricia, sadly, we're running low on time. And so we won't be able to get to all 10 of your tips for the aspiring exit strategy for the founder and the CEO that wants to be able to either be acquisition ready or just to make sure that their company is super strong and successful, because the same principles really apply. But how can people get a hold of you? What's the best way that they can maybe get the rest of your 10 tips and tools?
Sure. Come to our website, which is woodsidecap.com. And I'm Tricia at woodsidecap.com. So, either send me an email, hit the website. We have a lot of free industry reports that go into specific sector research on these reports. And I'm happy to send them the 10 tips as well.
That's perfect. Thank you so much, Tricia. This has been a great conversation. I hope you found it very informative as a legacy maker. Yes. I will make sure that we have all this information for you on the show notes on the website for Legacy in the Making Show. And also feel free to listen to us on iTunes. We're aiming for the new and noteworthy list. So hit that subscribe button. We're almost all the way there. I'm very excited. We've had a lot of great response, and hopefully you will help us get there and be a part of this legacy in the making. With that, Tricia, it's been such a pleasure. I'm really looking forward to potentially interviewing again. Maybe we can have a conversation about the next 5 tips.
Yes. Thank you so much, Tony Maree. I really appreciate it. It was great meeting with you.
I'm glad you tuned in to the Legacy in the Making show. If you're genuinely interested in creating positive change in your business or your life, or on a more global scale, I invite you to connect with me at tonymaree.com. That's Tony with a Y, Maree with 2 E's. When you get there, you'll find the Path to Purpose Master Plan, the truly brilliant method to make sure you're clear on why you're here. This is the absolute critical foundation to honing your instincts and leaving a legacy you'll be proud of. You can also find out about the Innate Wisdom Business Council, which is an opportunity to evolve your vision in the company of like-minded leaders, and much, much more. Thanks for listening. Remember to subscribe to the podcast, and we'll see you next time.